Afternoon, everyone. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with many of you, but for any newcomers, welcome. My name is Joe Doherty. I'm the Director of Communications at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a nonpartisan research institute focused exclusively on national security and foreign policy. We're grateful that you've taken the time today to join us as we preview Friday's scheduled speech by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Our three FDD experts that'll be presenting today. First one is Jonathan Schanzer, FDD Senior Vice President for Research. He is the author of several books on the Middle East, including Gaza Conflict 2021, Hamas, Israel, and 11 Days of War, which was the first book published about that war. Also with us is Richard Goldberg, FDD Senior Advisor, former NSC staff member on the Iran desk, and former foreign policy advisor to Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois. And lastly, David Daoud, FDD Senior Fellow focusing on Lebanon and Hezbollah, who most recently worked as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. First, today's call is on the record and it will be recorded. We will share a transcript of today's call with you within 24 hours of today's conclusion. Today's run of show will be as follows. First, we'll hear from Jonathan, then Richard, and we'll conclude with David before we move on to the Q&A portion and take your questions. Now, during the Q&A portion, you may submit your questions either via chat or by using the raise hand feature, in which case we'll let you know when you've unmuted and are good to ask your question. So we'll get this started with Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And apologies if there's a little bit of an echo. It's a bit tough running around here right now, trying to keep all of my appointments together. But look, the way that I think we ought to probably start this conversation is to say that there is a very dramatic moment approaching in the region. Amidst a war that is already filled with drama, we learned just 2 days ago that Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of the Iran-backed Hezbollah group in Lebanon, has scheduled a high-profile speech. The speech will be delivered at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. in the region. It will be delivered out of the Dahia neighborhood, which is southern Beirut. This is the stronghold of Hezbollah. The Secretary General of Hezbollah will be speaking to thousands of his supporters. And this is really the first time that he will be speaking since the war in Gaza began. Now, what's important to remember here is, first of all, that Hezbollah is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They answer to Iran. They have been deployed to various war zones by Iran. They ultimately do the bidding of the regime in Tehran. That is their job. It's why they exist. Now, they have a large number of fighters, 30,000 plus fighters on their roster. They have 150,000 rockets in their possession. That's roughly 10 times what we know to be in the Hamas arsenal. They have precision-guided munitions, very precise weaponry that no other non-state actor has ever possessed before. They have fighters that have trained alongside the Iranian military, the Russian military, and beyond. They've been advisors in places like Gaza, as well as in Yemen and other places where Shiite militias have been activated. There is a very real temptation for this group to be drawn into this conflict or to be willingly deployed. What we have seen since October 8th, since the day after the massacre in southern Israel, is that Hezbollah has been laying down fire to help draw Israel away from Gaza. There have been, on average, 15 or 20 different anti-tank attacks against Israel every day since October 8th. They have targeted civilian infrastructure. They have targeted military infrastructure. There have been reports of drones dispatched into northern Israel, and there is the potential for a much wider war. Israel, in response, has been taking out just about every team that has tried to fire those rockets or those anti-tank missiles into Israel, and they have killed officially more than 50 Hezbollah fighters. I believe that number could be even 4 times as many as Hezbollah is admitting. The group has made a very big deal about the number of so-called martyrs that have resulted from these operations. In other words, there is an attempt to really rally the Hezbollah supporters of Lebanon to try to gain sympathy for Hezbollah's cause. The bigger picture message that we're hearing out of Hezbollah right now is that they are defending the Muslim world. They are defending Hamas, who are defenders of the Muslim world. Of course, I would take issue with the framing of their argument, but this is what is being, I think, spoon-fed to the population of Lebanon and really to much of the wider Muslim world. To be very clear, there is a severe temptation right now on the part of Nasrallah to enter into this conflict. Should he do that, he would be dragging Lebanon into a disaster. We already know that Lebanon is in massive debt, more than probably $150 billion. They have political gridlock. They are dominated by Hezbollah already. You could imagine what might happen when, if Israel is forced to respond to some of the formidable threats that Hezbollah poses. This would not be a good development. Similarly, it would not be a good development for Israel to be drawn into a 2-front conflict or more. I think the end result would likely be disastrous for all sides. Now, very briefly, the choices ahead. Nasrallah has not, I think, probably not quite made up his mind yet about the direction that he wants to take this speech. That is my guess. He has put himself in a position now where he really must deliver a speech, and he will be tempted, and we will be pushed. We know that Iran has been pushing him to enter into this war, and so has Hamas. So the temptation is there. He's got 2 primary, the fork in the road, or 2 roads, basically. One is that he allows Hezbollah to become a tool of Iran's broader war against Israel and likely brings Lebanon to the brink of disaster. The other is that he says a lot of tough things about Israel and talks about how weak Israel is or weak America is, but that ultimately he laments that there are aircraft carriers off the coast of Lebanon right now with American officials warning Hezbollah not to get in, and that he does not have a choice but to stand by and allow for this to happen under the threat of the United States. There are, of course, variations on both of these themes. You could see minor escalations without pushing the region to full war, or you could see an acquiescence to the realities while still continuing to target Israel in the ways that fall beneath the threshold of a full-blown conflict. To be clear, the United States and Israel both are trying to contain this. They would not welcome an escalation. Iran would welcome such an escalation. This is something of a staring contest. There is a standoff here, and a lot of it could be decided by Friday, and that's why we wanted to bring this speech to your attention and to make sure that you understood, as I think we now do, of the very serious nature of the rhetoric that will be deployed at 8 a.m. Eastern time on Friday. Joe, back to you.
Jonathan, thank you for that. A quick reminder that we will be taking Q&A after each of the speakers provides their opening comments. We'll now move over to Richard Goldberg. Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on John's comments with just a good framing of sort of the military posture of both the United States and Israel vis-a-vis the Hezbollah Northern Front threat, and understanding that a Hezbollah threat could also be a Syrian threat tied into that from Bashar Assad, depending on how the Israelis would need to retaliate, depending on what Assad would do as well. So cumulatively looking at that Northern Front, we already have seen, as John said, a low-scale to mid-scale conflict that is ongoing every single day. To be, to basically reflect on this. If there wasn't October 7th, if there wasn't a war in Gaza, and we saw what's going on the northern border today, we would say that there is already a Lebanon, Israel, Hezbollah, Israel war going on. This would already be beyond the pale. We now have almost led ourselves into a new normal of this conflict where with just, just 30 more rockets coming, just 5 more anti-tank guided missiles coming, and gradually, the escalation happens anyways. Now we see some anti-aircraft missiles being rolled out by Hezbollah, trying to target the Israeli drones coming by. That will continue to increase. And so whether or not we see Nasrallah move to the much larger conflict that John's talking about, or even continue this slow scale of escalation, this is still putting a lot of stress on the Israeli military posture, having to conceive of that northern front, respond to it, prepare for it. We've seen the Houthis at the direction of Iran open up a southern front from the other direction down in Yemen. Again, the Israelis having to be concerned about that, ensuring that no ballistic missiles or cruise missiles are coming at Israel from Yemen. So that's the entirety of the picture. You hear from Israeli officials all the time a lot of bombastic rhetoric. If Hezbollah does something, if they escalate, if they use their 150,000 rockets, we will send Lebanon back to the Stone Age. That's a comment you heard from the defense minister weeks ago. Just today, we saw the opposition leader, the former prime minister, issuing his own video statement, not even in the government or the security cabinet, but echoing the same comments, talking to Lebanon, talking to Lebanese people, talking to Nasrallah, saying, there is going to be unity of effort across the political spectrum in Israel for a massive retaliation. You don't want what's going to happen to Lebanon. Why are they making those kind of comments? A little bit different than you would be normally used to from Israelis who are more into showing instead of telling their strength. The reason is when you talk about 150,000 rockets, including thousands of precision guided munitions, cruise missile capabilities, UAV capabilities, and on, the potential for some sort of ballistic missile capability, perhaps out of Syria, additional drones out of Syria, whatever the IRGC might be providing as well, in addition to Assad. You are talking about the potential for an overwhelming barrage on northern Israel, reaching all the way down into central Israel as well, with very long range and precision. The Israelis have the Iron Dome system. You've seen that obviously on display for a number of years. It's been their primary defensive missile defense system towards Gaza. That can be used for a lot of the rockets that come out of Hezbollah, but not all of them. You've heard about the David Sling system. This was designed for additional cruise missile defense, UAV defense, and these longer range rockets, short range missiles that Hezbollah has developed. You have the Arrow system. That's good for ballistic missile defense. And you saw that already activated in the last 36 hours vis-a-vis the Houthi threat. And then you have cruise missiles coming in, and that's where the United States off the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean can provide additional support from our Aegis destroyer to intercept cruise missiles that would be coming in as well. You saw that happen in the Red Sea during a recent Houthi cruise missile attack on Israel from Yemen. Putting that in perspective, that is a lot of different systems and capabilities that are layered on top of each other, but they're not going to cut it, and the Israelis know that. They will be able to thin out a major barrage coming from Lebanon. They'll be able to defend potentially for some time critical infrastructure and major population centers and try to get as much as they can. But it will not be the same type of missile defense scenario that you're used to seeing from the rockets coming out of Gaza, where Iron Dome has had a 95% effectiveness rate. Therefore, what is the doctrine there? The doctrine there is defend as much as you can for as long as you can, using all of these systems together, and respond with overwhelming force to bring the conflict to a close as quickly as possible. And so when the Israelis are threatening to send Lebanon back into the Stone Age, that is going to have to be a part of their military response based on the amount of threat and the lethality of that threat that they would see coming in. Last thing I would close in, Hezbollah, of course, like Hamas, because they in fact fought Hamas, notorious for using human shields. They embed their equipment, their military capabilities, their rockets, their missiles in civilian locations. And so the same types of problems difficulties, challenges that you've seen the Israelis have to face in taking out Hamas in Gaza will also face the Israelis in Lebanon as well. Human shields, of course, a war crime, a violation of international law. And so when we start thinking about Hezbollah and talking about Hezbollah locations in Lebanon, remember to keep that in the back of your mind. They invented the human shield concept here with the Iranians. It was exported to Hamas in Gaza.
Rich, thank you very much. David, over to you now.
Thank you. So I'll be breaking this down into three parts. The first part is kind of Hezbollah's domestic assessment and how that's going to impact the group's behavior, how that has impacted, indeed, the group's behavior until now. Iran's assessment and how that meshes into what we can predict about Hezbollah's moves. And finally, what we can expect from Nasrallah's speech beyond just the rhetoric. So Hezbollah's domestic context is one where since October 17th, 2019, you've had a country in economic collapse, probably one of the worst in modern history. You have an inflation rate that is second only to Venezuela. The Lebanese pound is worthless. Lebanon's infrastructure is already, severely behind capability of servicing the Lebanese population. There are no reforms forthcoming. Most importantly, there's no more foreign aid coming into Lebanon. Right? The old donations that used to come from the West and the Gulf states have been halted, in large part because of this the Hezbollah's outsized power within Lebanon and the impact that's had on Lebanese domestic and foreign politics and how Lebanon has affected the region. So if Hezbollah were to start a war, several things would happen. First, you can expect Lebanese ire, which has been directed against the political echelon as a whole, but not against Hezbollah specifically for the past 4 years, to increasingly be directed against Hezbollah. An assessment of, hey, we're already suffering. Why did you bring this upon us in addition to our suffering? We don't have food. We barely have water. Why bring a security conflagration onto us? We saw this in kind of a micro format in July of 2021, if I recall correctly, when Hezbollah fired rockets for the first time into the Sheba Farms Hardov. And as the rocket launching platform was returning, the truck, it was attacked by villagers in the Druze village of Shweya. Now, this is something that Hezbollah does not want to happen on a micro scale. So it can't be seen to initiate a conflict with the state of Israel. There is a possibility, however, that through this goading that is happening on at the border, they are trying to get the Israelis to throw a first punch, proverbially speaking, and then to justify their subsequent actions, the war that they will enter into, that Lebanon will enter into, as a defense against, quote, Zionist aggression. That is kind of their one way of getting out this. Again, the day after the war, there will be no reconstruction aid. Iran's pockets are not deep enough to fund the reconstruction of not just South Lebanon or Dahi or the Bekaa, but because of Hezbollah's intertwining with Lebanon. And again, this is not to say that Lebanon equals Hezbollah is Lebanon, but Hezbollah is intertwined with Lebanon's civilian infrastructure, with its population, with its government. The damage that the Israelis have said is will come upon Lebanon is unavoidable as a result. There will be no reconstruction aid for that. Iran can't fund all of that, and the Gulf states and the West will certainly not decide to bankroll a Hezbollah adventure. So this is what brings us to kind of where Iran stands right now. If it decides to activate Hezbollah, it risks not just Hezbollah being damaged in the war, in the subsequent or immediate conflict with Israel, but possible loss of its support base. At the same time, in Gaza, Iran has spent the better part of the past 20 years building up what I've called the southwestern front of the resistance axis against Israel. This is not just Hamas. Right? This is the joint operations room of the Palestinian resistance factions that acted on October 7th. And those are the factions that have built themselves up in Gaza. And Iran has spent considerable funds and effort and training in building up these factions to what we've seen today. So with Israel's military effort underway in the Gaza Strip, Iran risks losing those factions or their destruction. Is Iran willing to risk Hezbollah, which is its star proxy, its most lethal entity, kind of the vanguard of Iranian expansionism in the region? If we see every time Iran has entered into a country, be it Iraq, Yemen, Syria, its involvement in the Palestinian territories, Hezbollah has been the spearhead. So are you willing to risk an entity that valuable for your 20-year investment in the Gaza Strip in admittedly entities that are like Hamas, of relatively dubious reliability, certainly not as effective. Now, that is something that I can't answer. That's up to the Iranians. But it is not a clear-cut, there is no clear-cut answer to that question. And that's what makes it worrisome, that Iran could order Hezbollah to enter into the fray and absorb whatever costs may come as a result. And as Jonathan noted earlier, right, Hezbollah is not just a mere proxy of Iran. It is what I call an extension, in the sense that my arm is an extension of me. Hezbollah will have no choice but to enter. If we compare this to the entry into Syria in 2011, I doubt Hezbollah was thrilled to burn its political capital in the Arab world to save Bashar al-Assad, but it was necessary for the regime in Iran's survival for it to do so, and so it did so. Now, this brings us to Nasrallah's speech, what to expect. We can expect a lot of the same old, right? An assessment of the situation since October 7th that meshes the facts in with Hezbollah's narrative. Israel is weak, its army is incapable of defending it, Israeli society is brittle. The narrative of Awhan min Bayt al-Ankabut, Israel is weaker than a spider's web, on full display, now with ostensible proof. There will be an assessment alongside that Israel probably can't survive without American assistance, and hence why we have American aircraft carriers in the region. Then there will be an assessment of Palestinian side of the equation that will, again, be the inverse of the Israeli assessment. The Palestinian resistance is strong and capable. It has demonstrated its strength, that resistance is the only way to reclaim land, and that the imminent liberation of all Palestine from the river to the sea has begun. But there's a risk that's been going on in my head. Nasrallah, from the outset of the announcement of the speech to this point, has been engaged into Hezbollah's typical theatricality. The announcement, as you all may know, came with Nasrallah showing his back to a camera in front of a Hezbollah flag. It was meant to convey an ominous message to the Israelis, and one that is hopeful to the Hezbollah base. I worry that there may be an ounce of theatricality or an action of theatricality alongside the speech. One thing that's been kind of going on in my mind is the 2006 war strike on the INS Khanit, where Nasrallah essentially did a play-by-play of the missile attack on the Israeli naval ship, basically to magnify the impact of this strike. Now, what if Nasrallah decides to, as his speech is being given, to have Hezbollah engage in some form of theatricality on the border? That is not pure theatricality, obviously. There's a military component to it. That does lead to this snowball effect that could lead to an escalation between Hezbollah and Israel that leads Lebanon into war. And that is something that we should watch out for, that Hezbollah will act irresponsibly, and that it will miscalculate, just as they did in 2006, right? There was the "Law kuntu alam," had I but known moment then, but it is unclear that they have genuinely learned their lesson now. There's also the possibility that Iran has ordered Hezbollah, as we noted earlier, to enter into the fray, because saving the Gaza-based resistance axis factions is that important.
David, thank you very much. A reminder that we will be going to the question and answer portion of the call right now. I'll get to the instructions real quick. Again, a reminder that you can ask your questions by either typing it into the chat box, or you can use the raise hand feature, and we will unmute you and give you an opportunity to ask the question. While we are waiting on questions from those journalists that are calling in, I want to pose two, one to Richard and one to David. First one for Richard will be, you mentioned the precision-guided missiles and the significance of that. Can you briefly explain the differences in military capabilities between Hezbollah and Hamas, which I understand is significant? And then David, if you could just put some thought to what is perhaps the one thing that you're most concerned about from Nasrallah saying on Friday. So Rich, first over to you with that question.
Yeah, so I think the way to compare is just quantity. So you're talking about 15,000 versus 150,000. Lethality, just, how big of a boom do these weapons actually create? What kind of destruction power do they have? And the types of larger rockets, short-range missiles that we're talking about Hezbollah having are simply more capable, more built up, more lethal than the Schanzer rocket and more advanced type rocket that you've seen Hamas develop. And then the precision piece, the accuracy of these weapons. The Iron Dome, of course, the amazing thing about the technology is its ability to discern what is an imperfect rocket because of all its defects, its homemade nature, and it's not moving in a clear arc. It's spinning, it's moving different directions. It lands in a field, it lands somewhere else, it lands inside Gaza on a hospital. The radar system is able to pick that up and discern between a target and try to figure out where is it going and whether or not you need to intercept and waste the interceptor on it. And so because so many of those rockets do fail to hit targets, it's a different kind of threat you're dealing with from Hamas. When you're talking about precision guided munition kits that have been provided by the IRGC over the last decade, converting what would be more conventional, rockets of a less precise nature into precision guided munitions. We're talking about taking 1,000 maybe at a time and saying we're going to point them all at Ben Gurion Airport or against this power plant or against this civilian infrastructure with a high degree of confidence that they're all going to land and hit the target in some area close to it, which means all your defenses are going to have to try to beam out and clear out that barrage and get as much as you can in that single moment, knowing that the next barrage is right behind it. And so just that nature of the threat is so much higher, so much more expansive that you can't be a turtle. You can't just go inside your shell and let your missile defense try to save you. You're going to have an offensive response very quickly while trying to thin out the threat as it's coming.
Thank you, Rich. David?
So there are several things that worry me about what could come in Nasrallah's speech, and they're not necessarily all equally likely or equally probable. The thing that would worry me the most is obviously that Iran will have told Hezbollah, we need to step in, you need to step in, activate the Northern Front, right? And that perhaps and should be the most worrisome outcome of the speech, and that this speech by Nasrallah is an announcement of opening that front. I don't think that's necessarily the likeliest scenario because I think Hezbollah prefers to act more clandestinely, right, to catch Israel off guard, right? They love to talk about surprises, and as we saw with October 7th, the preference would be to catch Israel off guard because that's where you can maximize the havoc and the barbarism that you can engage in. The likelier scenario that concerns me is what I mentioned earlier, the idea that Nasrallah could time his speech with some kind of action that he intends as a show of force, right, to demonstrate that the resistance, meaning Hezbollah in this case, is viable. It is capable of initiating against the Israelis, basically buttressing the narrative that Hezbollah has built up of itself among its supporters, that it is not weak, that it is not deterred by Israel, and so on, but that this will be a miscalculation on Nasrallah's part. Right? That, as these things happen, as Hezbollah has admitted in the past, any military action taken against Israel runs a risk of escalation that could snowball into full war. Now, right now, they've been willing to take this risk in contrast to the last 4 years, where they've kind of taken a more cautious approach. They've exported their activities a lot to the Palestinian factions that exist in Lebanon, or tried to move, as I've noticed, a front into Israel and Israeli-held territories. Now they're betting on Israel being distracted in Gaza. But recall in 2006, before the Second Lebanon War broke out, Israel was also engaged in Gaza after Palestinian militants had kidnapped Gilad Shalit, and Nasrallah miscalculated on the north, and that led to a war. So this is something that weighs on my mind, that Nasrallah could once again think that Israel is now committed to Gaza. The ground troops are in Gaza. Israel's attention needs to be fully on Gaza. That Hezbollah can engage in brinksmanship and not have to pay the price, but that he may overplay his hand.
Thank you, David. We do have a question that has come in from Karen Hajar. And Karen, I hope I pronounced that correctly. My apologies if I don't. Question is, what, if anything, is the Biden administration doing to deter Iran? What else could it be doing? And could it be sending any other messages to Hezbollah? And how? So I'll open that up to the team here. And I know that Jonathan is listening, even though he is not on screen here.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first crack at that. Hope I'm coming through okay. Look, the U.S. has sent, that's great. So the U.S. has sent significant military assets to the region, and Biden has sent a clear message through the deployment of those assets and through words to both the Islamic Republic and to Hezbollah, saying, don't even think about it. We know that there have been private missives that have also been sent by way of intermediaries. And in fact, the regime and Hezbollah have made mention of this fact over the last several days, that the U.S., I mean, the way they put it is that the U.S. is asking. But if you hear, for example, John Kirby, the spokesman for the NSC, he is saying that the administration is telling them not to get involved. I think, if the administration gets what it wants out of this, there will be credible deterrence. The Iranians and Hezbollah will believe that the administration is willing to take action. And in that way, Israel has an opportunity to potentially finish what it started in Gaza, and then everybody goes back to their corner. I don't believe that it will be a clean break in that way. I think we're likely to continue to see Hezbollah fire rockets and test Israel in ways that fall beneath the threshold, but also don't trigger a response from the United States. The real problem here, quite honestly, and this is what we saw in 2006 as well, it's the law of unintended consequences. When Hezbollah thinks that it can fire, anti-tank rockets at Israel and that it will fall beneath the threshold of a conflict, but then they end up claiming the lives of, let's say, 5 or 6 soldiers in an attack that perhaps they didn't mean to be as lethal as it was, that is when the deterioration begins, and it may be difficult for the administration to stop. That said, I think the administration should get high marks up until now for having deterred this conflict from spiraling out of control and for trying to contain the conflict in Gaza to where it is.
Rich, David?
Rich, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I'd second everything that Jonathan said. Again, the one thing that weighs on my mind is that Hezbollah does not take orders from Washington, D.C. and cannot appear to do so. President Biden, I think his rhetorical support, his actual support for Israel, I think couldn't be asked. At the same time, Hezbollah needs to maintain this image of itself that it does not bow down in front of American pressure. And again, this could actually counterintuitively lead them to engage in brinksmanship, which could lead to unintended consequences. But insofar as what the Biden administration has done and is continuing to do, I think it's been on point.
Listen, my view is there's continued mixed signals sent to Tehran at this point. And to the extent that the Israelis are messaging the consequences that they will be forced to, based on their response doctrine, inflict upon Lebanon, is likely the most important thing that's weighing on Nasrallah's mind in balancing the Iranian push to enter versus what will happen to Lebanon, and what David, I think, laid out at the beginning on the internal dynamics there. The fact that there is a carrier strike group off the coast is interesting. Maybe it's scaring the Lebanese themselves, and that's creating a counter pressure on Nasrallah. I don't think anybody in their right mind believes Joe Biden is opening fire on Hezbollah and putting the United States in harm's way of that conflict. I could see that being there to conduct an evacuation out of Lebanon quickly, and an evacuation out of Israel by military means. We train for that. It's called a NEO, a non-combatant evacuation order. You can obviously see the destroyer, the Aegis destroyer, providing additional missile defense coverage, especially for the cruise missiles and drones coming out of Lebanon. As you see, we've already committed to that and have activated that in the Red Sea. But the idea that there's going to be Tomahawk missiles fired on Lebanon from the United States, that seems pretty far-fetched. And so I don't think that that's part of the deterrence calculation right now. Meanwhile, the Iranians are looking at the full board. They're opening fire on U.S. forces every single day, continuing in Iraq and Syria, 2 to 3 a day now. We're still taking still since the strike on the unmanned, manless munition depots on the Syrian border. We still see various reports, the potential of sanctions relief continuing for the regime as part of the nuclear deal the administration came to indirectly with Iran over the summer. They allowed the UN missile embargo to expire just a week and a half ago. Why? Because they're afraid that Iran will escalate the nuclear program in response if they trigger the snapback. Why are they afraid of an escalation on the nuclear program? Because they're deterred and don't want to have to use military force. So I don't actually buy that there is a lot of U.S. deterrence going on right now. I actually think that for the Hezbollah piece of this, the Israelis are providing the most possible deterrence in the threats of what's to come, along with the calculation that the Americans will be able to intercept a lot of what the most lethal type weapons that Nasrallah might unleash using the carrier strike group in response. Certainly deterrence for any ballistic missile threats or other types of threats that Assad would launch or that Iran itself might ever launch coming across to Israel. But in the context of Hezbollah itself, I don't see that.
You know what, guys, if I can, I just want to add one more thing. I mean, first of all, there's obviously, there's no party line here at FDD. We have independent analysts that think differently about all of these things, and I think you're hearing some of it. I will say, though, that even as Rich expresses some doubt about the deterrence capability of the United States right now, I will say the very fact that it is there off the coast with the kind of firepower that it brings must be weighing heavily on the minds of Hezbollah and Iran. Now, again, we can debate quite a bit, and I think there will be, certainly in the political debates here in the United States, there are a lot of people that might raise questions about the Biden administration's seriousness of purpose and whether it has its finger on the trigger. But the sheer firepower that has been brought to within a short distance of Lebanon right now, it has to be part of Nasrallah's calculus. There is no doubt. He's said it already, and his other Hezbollah people have also said so. The Iranians have said so. They are very aware of the American presence, and I think that is a good thing.
Thank you, John. We do have another question from John Rash of the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. John, over to you. John, we do not hear you. Okay, John, perhaps if you can type that your question into the chat box, and I will certainly read that for you. That would be very helpful. I think this is a good time. One of the things that is not directly Hezbollah related, but in a bigger picture, is the ring of fire that FDD research has recently talked about. And I'm wondering, Rich, if you can kind of discuss the concerns about not just a northern front from Hezbollah, but a wider escalation that could be developing.
Yeah, so this sort of ties back to my last comment. If you zoom out and you look at the various areas of potential escalation and where the Iranians continue to escalate on an incremental level every 2 days, you see multiple fronts opening up, and it stresses the picture across multiple borders and directions for Israel's military posture, while they're trying to focus on their primary objective right now of clearing Gaza, Hamas control and infrastructure. And so you've seen the Houthis in Yemen lighting up first cruise missiles and drones, now potentially medium-range ballistic missile. This is completely Iran. No, just the Houthis decided for fun over the weekend, like, oh, we should launch something against Israel. Like, how do we do it? Let's decide. They are owned and operated by the Islamic Republic. It's basically Hezbollah in Yemen at this point. In fact, Hezbollah was brought in to help train them alongside the IRGC over the last several years. The ballistic missile, cruise missile, and UAV capabilities are all provided by the IRGC. They're trained on them. They would not direct fire towards Israel without direction there. Militias that take orders directly from the IRGC throughout Iraq and in Syria continue to conduct their operations against U.S. forces. Clearly, a potential for the Syrian-based IRGC operatives to launch additional, whether it's drones or missiles against Israel out of Syria. We have seen that happen already. We've seen the Israelis respond there. And so we also have what's happening potentially in the West Bank. You know, it's a front we don't think about, but it is a front. It actually was the primary front that we were thinking about and writing about and reporting on for 2 years as Iranian-backed cells, Hamas, Islamic Jihad from Gaza, reaching into the West Bank, into various cities, building cells out, trying to undermine, collapse the Palestinian Authority, the IDF going in almost on a daily basis with operations trying to clear out those cells. It's another front that can always pop up. It's on people's minds at a very high level. We just don't think about it on a daily basis. That's another front here, in addition to the Hezbollah front and obviously Gaza as well. So multiple areas where the Iranians can escalate, modulate, stretch the Israelis. And even if there isn't an escalation, the threat of escalation still forces changes, still stretches your military. It's something you have to deal with.
Thank you, Rich. We do have a couple more questions I would like to present to the panelists here. From John Rash, Minneapolis Star Tribune. If Hezbollah decided to or is ordered to attack, what is the likelihood that U.S. forces would become more directly militarily involved, and what form might that take?
I'll answer that.
Thank you, David.
So I don't think that that U.S. forces will get directly involved. I don't think the Israelis would want that. I mean, Israel's defense doctrine has been since 1948 that Israel defends itself by itself. This wouldn't be in either country's interest for Israel to appear to be dependent upon the United States to be able to engage a terrorist organization that is in Lebanon. If anything, it seems that there's a recent report that I saw from October 20th that Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in Yediot Achronot had reported that he had been pushing Prime Minister Netanyahu to initiate against Hezbollah, and Netanyahu pushed back and said, "We're not doing this under American pressure." It seems like, if anything, if Hezbollah opens that front based on that Gantz would push Prime Minister Netanyahu to respond directly. And rather than depend upon the United States to do so, again, because it would lead to an erosion of Israel's deterrence image, its deterrence posture, that would ultimately not benefit the United States. The United States benefits from having an Israel that is perceived by everyone in the region as capable of defending itself by itself.
Rich or Jonathan, do you have anything to add there? Okay. Our next question, again from Boston Globe, Karen Hajar. How will other political military factions in Lebanon react if Hezbollah enters the conflict?
I'll take that again.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, right? You've had Sleiman Frangi, who was one of the candidates for president, come out and say that he's on board with everything that happened, that praised the October 7th action and all that. You've had Gibran Bassil also voice relatively more tepid support, but still support. By contrast, Najib Ma'ati, the prime minister, well, I guess the sitting prime minister, not an enemy of Hezbollah, but has made it very clear that it's not in Lebanon's interest to get involved. Amal, the Amal faction, the other major Shia faction, again, questionable support, but at the same time, it's one thing to offer support for rhetoric or rhetorical support for something that's happening in another country and that's affecting another people. I don't think it's in the Lebanese interest, or it's certainly not in the Lebanese interest to open up a war with Israel. And I don't think that even someone like Sleiman Frangi thinks that it's in Lebanon's interest for Lebanon to be dragged into this war with Israel. How they will react afterwards, it depends. But at the end of the day, the most they can offer is rhetorical pushback against Hezbollah. At the end of the day, Hezbollah remains the most powerful faction in Lebanon militarily. So whatever pushback they offer is going to be of limited impact.
Thanks, David. Question from Verdiana Garou. All these are non-state actors. We're talking about Hezbollah and not Lebanon. We're talking about Houthi and not Yemen, Hamas and not Palestinians. What is really the Achilles heel of these non-state organizations? And as a follow-up, could there be a possibility that Nasrallah wants to deliver this speech to gain more visibility before to take any action on Israel?
I guess back to me or Rich. I don't know.
I have a view
Go
on
ahead.
the macro of this.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Jonathan.
I'll weigh in after you. I was going to say, look, there are a couple of things. First of all, I do think that there are financial vulnerabilities which FDD has specialized in, and we continue to advocate for pressure on these non-state actors through the state sponsors that fund them, which is one of the reasons why the sanctions relief and other sort of relaxed policies as it relates to Iran over the last decade plus has actually only served to buttress and support these groups that are now mobilizing and destabilizing the region and thrusting America potentially into a regional conflict. This is the blowback, to be quite blunt, about the policies that we have seen adopted over the years as a result of the JCPOA and attempts to placate the regime on the nuclear front without addressing the dangerous and malign behavior through the non-state actors. So an Achilles heel would be the financing of these groups, and we've had ample opportunity. We will probably need to revisit all of these policies when this crisis has passed, because I do believe that if there's one thing that we've learned here, it is that appeasement of Iran on any level will probably come back to bite you. I do believe that the U.S. has probably seen Iran exactly for what it is now, and that's probably a good lesson to learn, but it was a tough one, I think, to learn, and it's certainly not over yet. Look, there are other ways to stifle these groups, countering the smuggling, and perhaps even more importantly, there is the question of targeting some of their military assets preemptively, as opposed to letting them continue to build strength in safe havens without weakening them over time. This is the kind of thing that I think, this is a lesson that is being learned right now in Israel, as well as the United States. The entire paradigm is now going to have to be reviewed. That there was, I think, several decades now where the U.S. and Israel together believed that, superior firepower by the Israelis and the United States would be enough to deter these actors. We are not seeing that right now. So a lot of revisions needed, I think, to the security doctrine that the U.S. and Israel have embraced up until this point.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before we go to a question from Michael Lippin, we've got the second question from Verdiana, which is, could Nasrallah be delivering this speech to gain more visibility before taking any type of action on Israel? David, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, again, it's hard to predict exactly what he's going to do. There could be limited action coupled with this speech. There could be, I mean, again, I think Nasrallah acutely realizes that it's not in Lebanon's interest to go to war right now. How does he, the best option for him is to maintain the resistance image, the image of Hezbollah as this powerful actor without incurring the price, right? A full Israeli pushback in the form of war. How does he thread that needle? Does he make this speech, promise more, and then as Israel becomes more bogged down in Gaza, which it will be if as this war proceeds. This is not going to be easy to eradicate Hamas and the rest of the militias with which it is allied in Gaza. As Israeli forces become more committed, as the toll of mobilizing the reserve forces is felt increasingly on the Israeli economy, does Nasrallah feel that he has more room then to act against Israel from the north? Again, not initiate full-scale conflict, but still kind of just press the Israelis a little bit more, take advantage of Israel being bogged down in Gaza to divide Israeli forces, create this image that Hezbollah is able to attack Israel and that Israel is deterred, but then not incur the full price of an Israeli retaliation. I think that's one possibility that Nasrallah could be teeing up for.
BOA's Michael Lippin asks, what capability does Israel have with its Iron Dome and other aerial defense systems to intercept at the same high success rate as with Hamas rockets from Gaza, a potential massive Hezbollah attack with thousands of missiles and rockets fired in a short space of time? Rich, that sounds like one for you.
Yeah, so just to repeat what we covered before, you have 10 times the number of threats on the estimated basis, like 150,000 versus 15,000. You have the more powerful threat among those 150,000 as far as the damage those rockets and missiles can do. And you have the precision difference to Hamas as well, whereas rockets coming from Hamas that might fall into a field back on itself in Gaza, maybe hit a house, and the ability to discern that with the Iron Dome radar. Now you're facing a salvo potentially of hundreds or thousands that are precision guided going towards the same target. And so Israel has a multi-layered missile defense. They have developed additional capabilities besides Iron Dome, specifically for the Lebanon threat front, the David Sling. You have the additional capabilities that the U.S. is providing off the coast for counter cruise missile, counter UAV, potentially counter BMD as well, ballistic missile defense. All of those put together will provide Israel some defense in the first opening salvo to at least thin out the threat, reduce the impact. But to pretend to be a turtle and think that that missile defense will save you on this threat, on this front, is not possible. It's not possible. The Israelis know that. Hezbollah knows that, which is why you hear the Israelis say over and over again, if Nasrallah opens up a full frontal assault, we will respond with overwhelming force because that is necessary based on the threat.
Yeah, and I would just actually add, I mean, I want to say, I want to echo what Rich has said. You got 3 layers of the Israeli missile defense. So it's Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow. David Sling is mid-range, Arrow is long-range. We've seen Arrow deployed. I don't believe we've seen David Sling yet deployed during this round. And these 3 layers should be quite good. Again, along with what will be supplemented. And by the way, I think we should just note that, when we talk about America's role in all of this, I think missile defense, helping with the defense of Israel, not going on offense is probably at least the likely response by the United States in the early phases if things go badly. And of course we don't know what all these different scenarios might look like, but you could imagine that on occasion the U.S. might see something that it wants to shoot down. The danger that we see right now, or at least that I think a lot of us have assessed, is that these PGMs that we keep talking about, and again, Hezbollah is the first non-state actor to acquire them, and we've not seen them fire any yet. It would be a significant provocation, a violation of norms, and really it should be alarming to any country dealing with non-state actors and asymmetric threats. When you see those kinds of weapons deployed on the battlefield, it is shattering a norm that you really don't want to see on other battlefields and in other contexts. But the concern I think that a number of us have been focused on is the blending of the PGMs into a traditional salvo of unguided rockets. it's going to be very hard for Israel or the United States, or any military for that matter, to be able to detect the PGM or two that are blended into a salvo of unguided rockets. How do you choose which rockets to shoot down? How do you know which one is going to be headed in a precise way toward a strategic target? This is going to be, I think, Israel's significant challenge should this theater erupt. But just to be very clear here, all of these scenarios that we're talking about, these are things that the U.S. is trying to deter. It's what Israel is trying to deter. And really, you are looking at a fateful decision that is now being weighed by a guy who is about to deliver the most important speech of his life, in my view. He spent his life with Hezbollah, and right now he has the opportunity to either declare war and to carry out the full objectives of the Islamic Republic, or attempt to, or to live to fight another day. But that will carry a message by itself, and it will not go unnoticed by the Israelis or any of the other actors in the region.
On that note, Jonathan, thank you. I think we will wrap up today's call. I do want to thank our experts today for making themselves available and providing their analysis. We will be providing a link to today's audio and video, as well as a transcript. As soon as that's available, we will share it with each of you. A reminder that FDD is a nonpartisan research institute focusing on national security and foreign policy. We thank each of you for being on today's call. We know you have busy schedules. There are a lot of things you could be doing, and we're grateful that you spend it with us to hear this analysis. To arrange a one-on-one conversation with any of our experts, please reach out to me at press@fdd.org, and we will arrange that. This does conclude today's call.